Hey everyone, welcome back to Haley on the Go. I'm Haley. Make sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcast to never miss an episode. We drop a new conversation every Thursday and are diving into really exciting topics like the one we're going to chat about today. We're talking all things media, press, what's happening to our legacy media, the transition to independent journalism, and so much more. I want to start us off with a quote that I think really captures where my mind is at this time in our hyper-politicized world. Whoever wants to overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing freedom of speech. Today to join us, we have a brilliant lawyer, political commentator, and up till this year, the host of her very own MSNBC show, The Katie Phang Show. Katie Phang, thanks for being here.
Oh, it's an honor to join you. Thanks for having me.
Super excited to have the chance to chat with you. I want to start us off in this conversation kind of at the beginning of this year. You hosted your own show in 2022 until earlier this year when we watched MSNBC cancel both the Katie Phang Show and Joy Reid's show all in 1 week, two diverse, powerful voices being taken off of air in such a short period of time. How did you find out this was happening, and what did the network communicate to you?
So I want the record to reflect that it wasn't just me and Joy. It was also Alex Wagner who got her show canceled in the span of about 36 hours. Another incredible woman and a woman of color. Jonathan Capehart lost his solo show. He became a part of an ensemble cast. I'll use that word, Haley. So did Eamon Moyledine. He had his own show, became a part of an ensemble cast. And the reason why I want to make sure that I include my colleagues, both former, and current now with people like Alex and Joy as we are joining in the world of independent media is I was incredibly proud to work at MSNBC. I was incredibly proud of the work that I was doing for the Katie Phang Show. Being the only Asian American woman with her name on a cable news program was groundbreaking, busting through the bamboo ceiling, as we call it, Haley, in the AAPI community. And I thought it was an incredible representation of representation. So I was, and I posted on my social media, and I stand by it, totally sandbagged by the news that my show had been canceled. I was actually, ironically, in the process of helping the teams for Joy Reid and Alex Wagner, the producers, the people that really always deserved more praise and recognition that they got because they were working so damn hard in cable news. I was trying to help them land on their feet, manage their shock that they had just heard the news the Sunday before, and then that Monday I found out that they canceled my show. In large part, if not according to the internet, to the network, was because MSNBC getting divorced from NBC didn't want to continue to use Telemundo Studios in Miami. I think that they did me a favor, Haley, because now I have a, big kind of presence in independent media. We all jokingly like to say it's Katie Unleashed, and I get to say and do and cover what I want. I do use probably more expletives, obviously, that would ever be kosher on cable news and the FCC. But, for somebody who at the time was 49 years old and on the verge of turning 50 just this past August, it certainly wasn't a part of the plan because I used to be the queen of the 1-year, 5-year, 10-year plan. And for somebody who prides themselves on being overly prepared, it was a real gutting moment. The news of my show being canceled created a lot of kind of a storm of emotions and feelings. One was financial insecurity. Although I still had a contract, I kind of reasonably saw that they weren't going to be using me as much. And so was I okay with being paid but sidelined for about 9 months? The other thing was imposter syndrome. Like, what did I do wrong? Am I not good enough? And that's a really tough thing to manage when you're almost 50. And to be clear, I had left a very successful law practice that I had launched on my own to go do full-time media at the end of 2021. So a little bit of a sense of betrayal, right? Like, you asked me to do this. Like, you came to me and said, we want you to have a TV show. And the metrics were great. The ratings were great and the fan response was great. And I was also working as a legal contributor and a legal correspondent for the network. So it wasn't like I was sitting there collecting a paycheck and sitting on my ass doing nothing. So It was a little bit of all of that, Haley. And I would like to say that 2025 has just been a year of chaos. But as we know, you can build some really great shit out of chaos, and that is what I am doing.
I love that. Lemons out of lemonades for sure. But I think it's really powerful for people to hear that someone of your stature and your success was experiencing imposter syndrome in this moment, because it can be really hard to grapple with career shifts, career changes. But I do think we all know that this really was not a reflection of you, your talent, your skill on air. I've heard you say since the show was plugged that you really do believe, as do I, and I think a lot of people, that this stemmed from Trump administration and his FCC chair and people kind of digging into and sending threatening letters to networks like NBC, like Disney, around their DEI policies, which is disgusting and having a generational impact that will take decades to recover in all of our societal structures, from news networks to agencies. But what kind of impacts does that have on our media when our administration, our leaders are able to sort of dictate who has a microphone?
Really appreciate your thoughtfulness about saying the generational impacts, because we do need to consider what kind of frontier we're kind of diving into. What are we creating for the people that are coming behind us? Because I've always taken a lot of pride in acknowledging that we stand on the shoulders of those before us.
Yeah.
And in this instance, I grew up with mainstream media, legacy media being what I call the Holy Trinity: ABC, CBS, NBC. And for me, as a young kid, right, we would park ourselves at the dinner table and I would be watching the Walter Cronkites, that type of energy. And I think that when you see capitulation happening from CBS, Paramount, and ABC settling lawsuits that were not only defensible but should be defended, and then you see Brendan Carr at the FCC sending these letters that are incredibly intimidating, which is so on brand for this administration, to be intimidating and to generate fear, to create complicity and compliance. And you see those letters go out and you start seeing massive changes and shifts in personnel and staffing and the talent at these places. I think it's disingenuous to say that it played no factor. And I will stand by that assertion. I think that if we're honest, that the fact that people like Joy, Reid, and I are two of the most outspoken anti-Trump people on the news played a role, and it's not a coincidence. I'm not saying that MSNBC was too chicken shit to write it out. I just think all things considered, when they're making business decisions, make a business decision. But I do think that it could have been handled differently. And, look, if they hadn't canceled the show, I'd still be there, Haley. I'd still be producing a great show, working with incredibly talented people, and but still also fighting, right? A little bit like salmon swimming upstream, like fighting to make sure that I can call Donald Trump, convicted felon Donald Trump, every time I use his name, and, to really call out the people of this administration for their xenophobia, their racism, their white nationalism, things like that. Like, I think that those are really important things, because if you don't do it, Haley, you ignore reality. And more importantly, you ignore the way that Americans that are tuning in to watch you are feeling. If you don't validate that, then I think that you're doing a disservice. People want to, and they do, watch me on YouTube and other platforms expressing disgust, fear, anger, frustration, joy, relief. And they know that it's genuine. And I think for them, they trust the information I'm providing, but then they also feel like it's me hanging out, having a cup of coffee or a beer, and it's the same thing that you would get in person as you're doing it through a screen.
We're going to get into the major independent media empire that you are building and doing incredible work on, but two things that you said that really stuck out to me. One is, for the generational impacts, I'm a big kind of believer in, if someone opens the door for you and you take the elevator up, you need to send it back down for someone else. And when we have less and less people who are able to send the elevator down for women, for people of color, for women of color, the trickle effect is going to last for a really long time. But the second thing that you said was, viewers are tuning in, or we're tuning in to you and your show to hear their feelings validated, to see you call out the administration, to have those honest, authentic conversations, to recognize that he's a convicted felon, like all of these things. Now that is eliminated. And what I think is an underaddressed problem is the viewers of networks, whatever network it is, we'll use MSNBC in this example, tuned in for a very long time to hear those conversations. And viewers aren't necessarily as aware of the reasoning behind shifts happening in networks. And then all of a sudden, they are seeing less of the messaging that they've always gone to those trusted networks to see, but they still trust those networks. What do those subtle shifts in messaging do over time to people's viewpoints of the world?
It's a direct erosion of trust. If for a long period of time you tuned in to a particular network, radio, podcast, or something, and you went and you were getting an education in a substantive area like the law, for example, or maybe a political issue, and then you noticed that the people that you felt like were not only articulating the way you felt and thought, but seemed like they were fighting to advance maybe your cause. Maybe you were, like me, hardcore believer and supporter and advocate for reproductive freedom, and you had somebody that was speaking out about its importance, and then suddenly you noticeably see a shift in tone, where maybe there's more of an apologetic way that we talk about reproductive freedom. Maybe we allow people that are, quote, pro-life to come on and espouse it, but there's no pushback. Wouldn't you feel betrayed? And then with that betrayal is the erosion of trust. And it's the chipping away that happens to the point where finally the viewer or the listener says, I don't feel comfortable with you anymore. I don't feel comfortable because I don't really know what version of you I'm going to be getting today. And that's when you lose the belief, the faith, and the trust of a viewer or a listener, and that's when they go elsewhere. There's just generally also this shift from linear cable to digital, like YouTube, et cetera, that you and I will talk about. But I will say, I have never said that mainstream legacy media is dead. In fact, the reality is I, along with others in independent media, still rely upon reporting and media from legacy media to be able to form a foundation for a lot of the stuff that we cover together. However, I do think, though, when it comes to the connection, I don't think the connection is as strong anymore with mainstream media. I think the connection is way stronger with those of us that are in independent media.
The erosion of trust element is really key. I have heard you say something, and I'm not going to be able to quote you directly, but that you operate, or that journalists operate in a currency of trust. And trust in facts, I think is how you say it. And I think that could not be more true. We have been seeing the quiet but very deliberate takeover of local media for a long time. And this is something that I'll talk to anyone who listens to me about is Sinclair Media.
Oh, about local journalism. I am a big advocate for local journalism, trust me.
So Sinclair Media, in case people don't know, they are the largest owner of TV networks across the nation. They own 192 stations in 89 markets, and they reach over 40% of the homes. But they have, over the last 5 to 7 years, been quietly buying up networks all across the country that have local or very trusted names like ABC, NBC, CBS, and they continue to operate under those names. But the ownership, Sinclair, has a very conservative agenda. Reporters have shown that they've been asked to read scripts word for word about the Trump administration across different networks, across different local newsrooms. And viewers don't know that the ownership has changed of these different networks across the entire country. We're seeing this shift in ideology, slightly conservative across, or more than slightly, across the country. As local journalists and local journalism news networks are being purchased up, how do we fight back? How do we bring ethical journalism back to legacy media to some extent? And then we'll transition to independent journalism. But what is it that viewers can be doing to know who they're watching, what they're watching?
Well, they can do their own research, as you just did, right? And be able to look into the ownership of these particular broadcasting companies. Even the bigger ones, like, the whole Skydance merger with Paramount was a very big deal that played into the decision to settle that 60 Minutes lawsuit that was brought by felon Trump concerning the interview that was done by Kamala Harris with 60 Minutes. But, local journalism, when I say that, I encourage it. I'm a big supporter of it because, for example, the Epstein files, which everybody is talking about these days, was blown wide open courtesy of a local journalist at the Miami Herald named Julie Brown. And so, we really need to be concerned about the desert that is being created in our own backyards when it comes to local journalism. Local journalism is the kind of thing, Haley, that most people really use if you think about it, right? We care about the national issues and how they impact us. But if you want to know whether or not that road is blocked, that's going to impact you being able to get to school, you're going to look at your local, news or your local paper, et cetera. And I don't want to be superficial about it, but when you're also trying to focus on local mayoral races, maybe city council, maybe school board, and we know exactly how much of an impact those have had on our life, not just our lifestyle, but on our lives. I mean, those are the things that you get local information from through your local journalism. The one thing that we can't give, either in independent media or legacy media, is critical thinking skills. And I think that those have gone by the wayside for so many consumers of information. But critical thinking skills can be regained, I think, when we continue in earnest to be providing, as you said a few minutes ago, the currency of trust through facts and evidence, right? The problem that we're facing, Haley, is the following. I could bring you on board as the expert in fill in the blank. And I could say, Haley, you are the expert in this subject matter and talk about it, and you will be 100% right. But somebody who's a consumer of information could say, well, Haley went to that liberal, bicoastal, elite Democratic school. I'm not going to listen to Haley. What you said, it's not that it was false. It wasn't like it was untrue, but they're discounting you because they're looking at you through the lens of distrust because of who you are. So it's less almost the information and it's more in the delivery. And I think that's where we've become so siloed. And that's really kind of, if you can figure out what the answer is to that, then you'll be a genius. Because I think that's what we're all struggling with right now. How do we bridge that gap in terms of penetrating people's silos so that they can understand that when Haley speaks, she speaks the truth. And it's not because she happens to, be somebody who supports Democratic policies. She just happens to be the expert in that subject matter, and you really should listen to her. That's been the true challenge, I think, for a lot of us.
And those challenges are brought up, I think, about the fairness doctrine, which was an FCC policy until about the 1980s that required broadcast networks to show both sides of an argument that impacted public discourse. And so it required there to be a conversation about what other people thought. And that really was repealed in the 1980s because of lobbying around Rush Limbaugh and the desire to make TV or news more dramatized and monetized and interesting. But we've really seen a spiral effect since we've lifted the requirement to at least let people hear both sides, which allowed experts to remain experts and opinionists remain opinion columnists or associated with their side of the story. I want to jump into what you're doing now. You have dived into independent media and have had a huge success. Fill us in on what you've been doing this year.
Oh, gosh. So I officially left MSNBC May 1st, and I've been friends with the guys at Midas Touch, the Mysalis brothers. I call them my little brothers because I don't have any little brothers. I've been friends with them for years, like before I even went into media. And when I left, I launched a YouTube channel called Katie Phang News, and it's powered by the Midas Touch Network. So it's my channel, but I work in conjunction with those guys, and they are amazing. And the channel is blowing up and doing so well. I'm currently on a subscriber push to be able to hit 500,000 subscribers by the end of 2025. We're very close, but just trying to kind of get across that finish line, which I think for me would be, you want to talk about validation. It would make me feel like, look, my message is getting out there. It's being reached to people. And it really is. And I am thrilled because I can do long form interviews. I can do long form monologues, and I can talk about the issues that I think are important. And for example, just yesterday, there was a big order that came in the criminal prosecution of James Comey's case. And it took a while. It was like a 28-minute video on YouTube, but I walked through a 24-page order from a judge. And it had such its impact, the order's consequences not only affect just James Comey, but Tish James and others. And it's also a reflection of the Trump administration's DOJ and all of the criticisms that we validly have about how it's being run and its lack of morality and competency. I couldn't do that on mainstream TV, Haley. I was fighting against a clock when I had a show. On a live show, you're only able to do a certain number of segments. And so on this YouTube channel, I get to explore these issues in depth. I get to challenge politicians and electeds to, really answer, not just give the canned response you might get on Meet the Press or a Sunday morning show. Then I also have a Substack that I am really proud of. I write, which I didn't really do a lot of before, obviously, because it was just video. Although I used to write for MSNBC Online a lot. But I write for the Substack, and it's great because Substack Lives, I can get on at the drop of a hat with you and do a Substack Live for 20 minutes and just kind of get into some breaking news or whatever's interesting. And then I'm also very active on all the other social media platforms like Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads. I still have a presence on X, but it's such a cesspool that I try really hard, like not spending too much time there. And then I'm also doing a lot of speaking engagements across the country. And then I also work for Democracy Defenders Fund, which is being run by Norm Eisen, who's the former ambassador in the Obama administration and the White House ethics czar. And I am a senior advisor for comms and litigation. And I help with strategy. And we have more than 200 cases currently against the Trump administration. So I am using kind of my media chops and my legal chops to make sure that I stake a claim in the pro-democracy space.
You are so busy. You're doing so much. It's incredible to see, though, how much your network has grown online since you launched your YouTube and your Substack. I mean, independent media really gives the ability to reach so many people. It democratizes voice. So many people have a microphone, but at the same side of that coin, anyone can have a microphone. And you're coming from being a lawyer, an experienced political commentator, and someone who had a career in this space. But we're also seeing anyone with an idea and maybe no background in that also start their Substack and their YouTube channel. There's a quote from Maria Ressa, who I love her, and it says, if a lie is told a million times, it becomes a fact. Since entering...
That's interesting.
Yeah. Since entering in the independent media space, what is sort of your take on the democratization of a microphone?
Ooh. I'm not always a fan, Haley, because to your well-taken point, when I sit and I tell you about the law, I've been practicing law for, 26 years now. I've tried cases as a prosecutor, including homicide cases, and I also was a civil litigator who's tried civil cases. Like, I've run law firms, I've run businesses, I've taught as an adjunct professor, I teach trial skills. Like, I actually know what the hell I'm talking about. The armchair lawyers are doing a disservice, and I see them everywhere, not just on YouTube, on TikTok. It is disturbing the amount of information that is disseminated on those platforms that has no vetting. It truly is the wild, wild west, which is why, for me, the way that I look at it is, if you get back to that trust factor that you and I talked about a little bit ago at the beginning of this episode, when people trust that you are not steering them wrong, same thing kind of applies if you're a client as a lawyer. Your client has to trust that you're going to be giving them the right advice and the right strategy. Same thing for a viewer or a listener. They want to trust that you are not steering them wrong. And when I don't know something, I'm the first to admit that I don't know it. And that is when I do bring somebody on to talk about it, because I think that knowledge is power. And the more that we empower people, the better that we're all going to be. So I just think that people, again, need to use their critical thinking skills to discern whether or not this person, and by the way, it's not just youth. It's not just somebody who's young. It's also older people that claim to have, some measure of experience or some measure of wisdom in something. I think I am a very outspoken person, and I use some pretty strong rhetoric almost all of the time, but even if my message is strong, Haley, the substance is real. I think we've seen a lot of people that have gone into these independent media spaces and they have a whole lot of bang and absolutely no buck, right? Like, they are just all out there and there's no substance, which is why you won't see them being challenged. You won't see them sitting down to across the table from somebody. I had an open invitation to Trump Legal to join my show when I was at MS, and I've done the same invitation for people to do it on my other YouTube stuff, and they don't take it. And I was told off the record that my show and Nicole Wallace's show were actually non grata. Nobody was allowed to go on our shows when I was on MSNBC. But you don't have to. For example, I never platformed an election denier on my channel or my show. I don't have to give that oxygen. You can hear a competing point of view, but a lie to your point, why am I adding to the 1 millionth count of that lie? I'm not going to give it credence because it's not true. So if I don't invite Candace Owens to come and hang out with me on my YouTube channel, it's because she's not going to be telling the truth on certain things, right? So I don't need that. I don't need to platform that and then be like, well, let me tell you why you're wrong. Now, look, I still believe in platforms like Crossfire and stuff, right? I would love to be able to sit there and have the back and forth with the Caroline Levitts of the world and the Pamela Joes and stuff. But you and I both know they're never going to sit in any capacity to be able to be cross-examined by me or anyone else who actually knows what the hell we're talking about.
How do we make sure that people who do know what they're talking about, who are operating out of a place of trust and expertise, have, I don't know if I want to say a louder microphone, but a identifier almost? Because I do think that especially young people who have always predominantly gotten their news online with algorithms that do reward sort of sensationalized content, that are training people to create content that is rage baity in a way to perform better, which then rewards them so that it's going to continue that cycle to show people who they can trust and who they can't trust in an independent media space. Because I really do think that that has contributed to the lack of appreciation for experts. Like we don't trust science, we don't trust doctors, we don't trust lawyers, we don't trust, like the list goes on. And for me, very concerned on how do we rebuild that trust and how do we begin to recognize experts as experts?
Well, there's the traditional way of recognizing an expert. Unfortunately, sometimes that does suggest age, right? But from experience through just having either honed a skill set, developed that skill in that experience in a particular area. But I'm not an ageist. And so there are some pretty brilliant young people out there that I like to bring onto my platforms, like Rachel Janfaza, who I talk to about the voting, the listening sessions that she does, and to understand the youth vote and the Gen Z vote, and to have a better understanding and empathy so that we can tap into accessing why we aren't picking up voters, or what are we doing wrong, or how can we actually overcome that. But then there's also this issue of the fake kind of expert that I call. One of my biggest pet peeves that I always had with legacy media, I'm curious to know if you actually feel this way, Haley, is you see the same damn people all the damn time on legacy mainstream media. And I'm not begrudging those that actually do have the chops to do it. But for example, just hear me out for a second. If you said, listen, I have this panel I need to fill, and I need a political analyst, right? Like you have a go-to list of a certain number of names, majority of which are white, majority of which are men, majority of which are older. Now, that's lazy in my opinion when you're trying to guest a panel or guest a segment, because why don't we actually hone in on what the segment's supposed to be about? If it is about the Gen Z vote, well, let's make sure that we bring somebody on who actually can reflect what the Gen Z vote is.
Oh my gosh,
not
the
just
amount
somebody
of times
who's
I have sat in the audience of a panel at a conference or watched one on the news talking about the Gen Z vote without a single member of Gen Z on it is crazy.
Yeah, no, and so for you, it's frustrating because you don't need somebody who then extrapolates information they might have read online somewhere about you. Like you're the better person, which is why for me, I have loved platforming candidates for office that have lived experience. And lived experience, again, doesn't mean that you have to be old. You can be Deja Fox, for example, right? People that have had to live on, SNAP benefits, or people that have had to rely on Planned Parenthood for their health care. Like these are people that need to be heard from. And so it's interesting, although I still believe that my currency that I traffic in is facts and evidence because it creates that trust you and I are talking about. I'm also big on the storytelling. Right? Because I feel like if you bring somebody on board, whether they're 20 or 50, and they tell you the story about how a policy, an issue, a law has impacted them, they are not only now weaving in that law, that policy, that fact, that evidence, but they're telling you the story of how it has made a difference in their life, good or bad. In my mind, that is the most incredibly effective way of creating trust, building it, and keeping it, because then you as a viewer or a listener understand that I, Katie Phang, have taken the time to bring you somebody. It's not me interpreting that person. It's I've brought that person to you. And you can listen. I'm not telling you what to do with what you've listened to. I'm telling you to take it in, digest it, and decide whether or not you think that that's the right thing that should be happening for our country moving forward. In my mind, that's one of the most persuasive but least aggressive ways of being able, I think, to put trust back into the way that we're interacting and interfacing with people.
You asked me if I feel the same way, and I think it really transitions well to my last question for you, which is where the future of legacy media and independent media, social media kind of combines, because I really do think that there's a role for legacy media to play in uplifting and amplifying trusted voices online to their audience, and then young trusted voices uplifting and amplifying legacy media to their audience. I think we've seen that. Or the only example that comes to my mind of a really good partnership there has been with Abby Phillips and Adam Mockler, who I know also has been with Midas
I
Network,
love Adam.
but that they have been doing a lot of collaboration work where it helps validate Adam as a trusted voice in the space to Abby's network and vice versa. Do you see a world in which there is cohesive, thoughtful partnerships between the two worlds? Because right now I feel like they are viewed as almost competitive with one another. Or where do you see these two worlds sort of evolving as we look to the future, especially as we look towards 2026 and a big election year where being able to discern facts has never been more important?
So I do think that we presently coexist in a way that doesn't seem particularly cohesive. And I think it's because it is competitive. I mean, linear TV, cable TV right now operates in straight metrics of ratings, right? And ratings is driven by viewership, but in large part, it's also its destiny and its future is outcome determinative on ads and money, right? It's not like we're still trying to do that. It's not like we're ignoring that in independent media, Haley, but I will say this. You know, we had just as much viewership on November 4th doing election coverage on independent media, if not more so, than some legacy media did, okay?
Yep.
And part of that is because, listen, there are some trusted voices when it comes to maybe poll results, like the Steve Kornackis, which we all love, right? And we trust him. But do I need to hear from the same old tired political analyst again who maybe sat there and said Zohran Mamdani has no fucking chance and blah, blah, blah? I mean, that out of touch disconnect is an insult and it's a waste of my time. It doesn't mean that I necessarily have to listen to somebody who's in love with Mamdani, but I do think, though, there is a disconnect between those voices that are platformed on mainstream media that have become the go-tos with the realities of America. And I don't think that people want to have their time wasted anymore. We live in an attention economy. So if you are trying to get information, you want it given to you in a way that's not only efficient, but is not going to annoy the shit out of you. And a lot of times when you tune into Legacy, you're like, is this person either going to get to the point or, oh yeah, look, it's so-and-so. They're going to say the same damn thing. Oh, look, they said the same damn thing again. And so you know what? That's when people say, click, I don't want that. I'm going to go to YouTube and get it somewhere else. Or I'm going to go to a streamer and get it somewhere else. Look, I think linear legacy media has realized how important digital is because they're all trying to launch podcasts right now, aren't they? They're all trying to get onto YouTube right now. And they're very much behind the 8 ball on this because there are those of us that figured it out a while ago that in order to reach people, it can't just be a 6.5-minute segment on live TV. It's got to be something deeper.
Well, you are doing a phenomenal job giving us the deeper, giving it in a real way and way that people really relate to. Thank you so much for coming on Haley on the Go, for all that you're doing. Everyone go subscribe and get Katie to 500,000 by the end of the year. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Haley. Thank you for the thoughtful conversation. It was incredible. I really appreciate it.